Can Chile do the same and win their first Copa America? What a mind to win it! And Chile is champion!
Welcome to the Chilean Football Show on the Red One TV. Hello and welcome to episode number 9 of the Chilean Football Show on the Red One TV YouTube channel and on Spotify in partnership with Chile Today News. We are a 1-hour show dedicated to Chilean football in English where we cover La Roja Femenina, Primera Division, Chileans abroad and everything in between. I'm your host, Matias Grez, taking over the mic today from our usual host, the esteemed Thomas Nef. Thomas joins me today. How are you? How does it feel to be on the other side of the mic for once?
It feels interesting. I'm liking the change already.
I'm not sure if it will be permanent. We have a slightly different format on today's episode to mark the conclusion of the Copa Libertadores Femenina, which was a historic tournament for Chilean teams. For the first time, the country had 2 teams reach the quarter-final stage. We were joined by our panellist and former player at Santiago Morning, Alex Ibaceta, to discuss the performance of our clubs and the general state of women's football in Chile moving forward. On top of that, we also previewed La Roja Femenina's big upcoming Olympic qualifiers against Cameroon, which were announced today, Monday, on the day of recording. That section is coming up now. Alex, thanks a lot for joining us again. It's good to have you back on the show after a brief absence. How have you been?
Yeah, I've been good. Been busy, but I've been enjoying watching a lot of football as of late, especially women's football. It's been there's been a lot of good matches on display.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's exactly what we wanted to talk about today. Obviously, mentioned at the top of the show that the recently finished Libertadores Femenina was a watershed tournament for Chilean teams in particular, who had 2 quarter-finalists for the first time ever. How do you obviously said there have been some really good tournaments, some really good games and individual performances as well. We highlighted on the last show, in particular in the group stages, Santiago Morning goalkeeper Ryan Torreiro, who is, third choice for the national team, really shining and, showing that, maybe Christian Endler, who, as we all know, is the best keeper in the world, might be looking over his shoulder a bit. So that's one good performance. What did you take away, individually and team performances from that?
Well, I think firstly for this being the first Copa Libertadores for Universidad de Chile, I think they did outstanding. They obviously got to the 3rd place position, and they pretty upsetting that they didn't get it, but I mean, they went far and went further than Santiago Morning, which has been at the pinnacle of Chilean women's football until now. But I think, as you mentioned, Ryan Torreiro and Nati Campos also, I think it needs a huge shout for the performances that she put up. I think to be fair, I think both keepers were the stars for both teams. I think that's mainly because of the opposition that both of the teams had to up front. Corinthians they're the current champions. Well, not anymore after the tournament finished, but they won it last year. And yeah, I think the keepers from both sides were kind of the stand-up performances of Chile.
And obviously that friendly competition can only help, with the national team and the progression of that. As we know, Laú came within a whisker of reaching the final in their first ever appearance, missing a penalty in normal time before losing on penalties to the eventual champions Ferroviaria. Obviously, it was a tough end to the competition for both teams, despite good performances early on. Santiago Morning obviously falling to a heavy 7-0 defeat to Corinthians in the quarterfinals, and Laú likewise 4-0 in the 3rd place playoff. Do you see those results? Do you think those results are indicative of how far Chilean football still has to go to compete with the best on the continent? Or do you think, they caught them on a hot evening or a cold evening, conversely, for the Chilean teams?
I think it's a mix of both. I think that Santiago Morning definitely could have done better to avoid a 9-0 defeat, for example. But also, I do think in terms of quality, in terms of players coming through, I think they still are a bit behind to, for example, Brazil, who's always produced really good players domestically. And then you have a lot of Argentinian players coming through, looking really good at Boca Juniors, at River Plate, and on the national team as well. But I think in Chile, they're lacking a lot of youth. You know, you have Carla Guerrero, you have Dani Pardo, Francisca Mardones, you know, they're all in their 30s already. So a lot of Chilean stars are getting to the end of their career, and I think that shows when they go up against a faster, more high tempo, a younger team, to say the least. So I think now it's all about the next generation that I think Chile has to focus on, which then they can compete in Copa Libertadores. And yeah, I think that's the principle of what's to look out for going forward.
And that essentially, that lack of development at youth level or coming through is going to be huge to the progression of women's football in the country. Obviously, going into the World Cup in France, I wrote about many of the failings of the ANFP over the years for their lack of, not only investment of money, but investment of time and resources into developing Chilean women's football. And based on that World Cup, it was obviously very clear that we had a really talented group of players who had kind of come through and excelled despite all of those shortcomings by the FA. Do you think now it's going to be a struggle given the years of neglect? It's going to be hard now to try and bring through another generation of players to essentially take the next step that these Chilean players haven't?
I think definitely. I think without a doubt. And it's not just Chile, it's not just ANFP, it's CONMEBOL in general. You see a lot of disparity between South American football and the rest of the world. Especially when you go up against, in the World Cup, Chile had to go up against the US women's national team, and there's no comparison there. But I do think that the youth has to be, I think youth players are very underrated when it comes to the importance of national teams and the success of national teams when it comes to bigger stages and world stages like the World Cup. And I think, yes, that the lack of support from ANFP will go hand in hand with that. And then you get into the vicious cycle of, the national team's not doing well. Why is the national team not doing well? Because you didn't invest. But they're not going to invest if the national team's not doing well. So, there's never a win for women's football. And it's just a vicious cycle. And until they correct that and they actually invest in women's football without wanting results right away, without realizing that it is a whole process behind developing a high standard, high level team, until then, you're not going to see a big change, I think.
And must mention, obviously, the ANFP, their investment in women's football, in the lead up to the Copa America, which was hosted in Chile, that acted as a qualifier. They have improved, but it remains to be seen, how serious that long-term investment is going to be. And like you said, you mentioned the word standard there. And you can't have a short-term band-aid solution where you really ramp things up for 2 tournaments, because it looks good and because, the lights are going to be on you. It needs to be years and years of progress. And like you said, it's going to be a while before we see the results of that. We see the fruit of that process. So, I mean, just off the back of this tournament, I don't know if you think how important it is for the development of our players, for maybe 1 or 2 European clubs to look at the top performers here and take those over, and then, the national team benefits from their development that way.
Yeah, I think, especially this Copa Libertadores, it was very available to watch, especially from the UK. You watch it on Zona Latina on YouTube. I tweeted it out. I got a lot of my UK following to watch that, and I was able to get a few journalists to watch it as well, and we were able to discuss it, which I've never been able to do. So this, tournaments like Copa Libertadores are only a good thing, and especially when we have 2 teams in the quarterfinals, that raises awareness. especially when people who don't normally watch women's football, people who don't normally follow Santiago Morning or with Chile, you know, maybe at the beginning stages, it's harder to bring a crowd, but when you're like, we have a team in Copa Libertadores in the quarterfinal right now, in the semifinal right now, in the third place spot right now, you get people to watch. And that's, you know, any awareness of the quality of women's football is good. And at the moment, you know, Daniela Zamora just signed for a Swedish club. It was announced today, and that's huge. You know, we start seeing players getting recognized with the visibility that we have from Copa Libertadores streaming on YouTube for free, for streaming on Facebook for free. Once we have more visibility on the current state of Chilean football, and when people see the quality of that, we have players going abroad, which in turn is only good for our national team. So visibility of these tournaments is crucial for the future and the process of growth.
Yeah, and like you said, I mean, everything because of the exposure, because of the improvement and how high quality it is. I mean, it's been a snowball effect over the last few years. I mean, in Chile in particular, the interest in women's football has really picked up. And I think obviously that has a lot to do with, like you said, it being now readily available for people to view. I mean, tournaments like this especially. And obviously that Daniela Zamora, you know, very, very deserving of that move. I mean, she's been, you know, Laú's best player for some time now. She's one of my personal favourite players to watch for the national team. But you previously were part of the setup at Santiago Morning, and you know you played there for a while. And I wanted to know, obviously their coach Paulo Navarro is you know really, really highly regarded, not only in the country but on the continent as one of the leading figures and one of the best coaches. You know, just give me a bit of insight, because like you mentioned earlier, they have been at the forefront of leading things with women's football in Chile, you know, when it comes to devoting resources, devoting time. Give me an insight into what it was like while you were there, and in particular what she was like to work under.
Yeah, I was there in 2017. So I was right before they became big, if that makes sense. You know, when I was at Santiago Morning, Colo-Colo were still playing, you know, very, very well. Palestino was still at the top. And then just the year after that, prior to that, 2 years within, there was already professional contracts being written. So by the time I left, the progress in those next few years was immense. So, I mean, I still say till this day that Paulo Navarro is arguably the best coach that I've ever played under. And it's for very unusual reasons. I think you have to be a very specific type of player to appreciate her coaching. She is, you know, the reason why Santiago Morning has gotten everything that they've gotten is because of Paula. She is hard-headed in the best way. She is the most stubborn woman you will ever meet, and she will not take no for an answer. So if there's one person that you want to be going up against these all-men board that is hard to convince to invest in women's football, there's one person that you want to be going up against the ANFP and be like, you need to stop just under-investing women's football, and look what's happening. You know, she's a person that you want to send into these rooms, into these meetings, and she's gotten a lot. And without her character and personality, I don't think that ever would have happened. And because of her, that raises the standard of Santiago Morning, which in turn raises the standard of all the other teams because they're falling behind. And a team like Colo-Colo and a team like Universidad de Chile, they're not going to be like, we're falling behind these people. It's just not going to happen. But in terms of coaching, she's, as I said, she's very hard-headed and stubborn, and she's kind of like a tough love coach. But it was great. You know, the first time my debut game was against Palestino. That was entertaining to say the least, just throwing me into the deep end of the water there. And I started as a fullback for the first half, and then I got taken off a little bit into the second half. And the first thing that Paulo Navarro did when I got off the pitch was she grabbed a chair and sat me right next to her, and she coached me of everything that she wanted me to improve on. You don't get that often. You don't get that commitment, and she does it. And you know, there's some things that you're not going to want to hear, but she does it full-heartedly because she believes in you, and she's telling you things that she wants to see for you to get better. You know, she's not doing it for herself. She's not doing it for the club. She's doing it for you. And that really struck me. That was on my first game there. So that kind of just engraved in my head really well. But, yeah, she's not going to be complimenting you. She's not the coach that's going to be like, yeah, you did great, sweetie. Keep going. Like, she's going to call you out on all the things that you're doing bad more than the things you did good. But then once in a while, she'll be like, I know I'm hard on you guys, but you guys need to realize that you're here for a reason, that I'm not a coach that's going to waste time on people that I don't believe in. So if you're playing under her, you're there for a reason. You're there to grow. You're there because she believes in you. So that really stuck with me, and I thoroughly enjoyed playing under her, because it was a big change from a lot of other coaches that I've had that don't have that mentality, especially in women's football. You don't have that great of a coach. I mean, it's not a secret that in women's football you kind of get the dads and the moms and the coaches, and my university, we had the same coach for 16 years and he never made playoffs. But why? It's women's football, so there was never going to be an advancement to that. So she was the first coach that was a proper coach in women's football, and that was a big eye opener for me. And of course, playing with the players, Pancha Mardones is still probably the best player that I've ever played with. I think she's brilliant, and I got to play with players that went to the World Cup, so that was only a great experience for me.
And you said, obviously, she has been at the forefront of women's football for quite some time as, one of the best coaches, but also one of the leading figures in the country. Obviously, a few years ago was in the running for the men's job at Morning, and would have been well deserving of that given her track record. But like you said, I mean, despite how hard-headed she is, how passionate she is, and how much she would push for investment, like you said, into women's football, it has to come from the top. It can't be one person. There has to be complete buy-in from that. We mentioned this being a historic Libertadores for women's football, but what we need to make sure essentially is that, it's not the first and last time we have two teams in the quarterfinals. We saw when both the men and women's season got cancelled due to the coronavirus pandemic, they did everything in their power to get the men's up and running as quickly as possible, and it felt like for a while that the women's league was an afterthought. I mean, how crucial is it now that, yes, we've had a historic tournament, but we can't now sit back and admire that as a country, as the people that run football? How important is it now, do you think, that they really need to step up and capitalise on this rather than just sit back and think of this as a win?
Yeah, definitely. I think a good example would be to look at the WSL in England right now. It was the same. It was the same thing. The WSL got curtailed when we went into lockdown and didn't come back until the next season. The Premier League got curtailed for a month and then came back for the summer. But the FA didn't just sit back and be like, we don't have to worry about women's football until the next season. There was a lot of anticipation and a lot of effort put into the time that they had off. Pernille Harder signed for the most expensive transfer fee in women's football history. They still played in big stadiums. The broadcasting got better. And look, a year later now we have a broadcast deal with Sky Sports and BBC. That's a great example of how disparity, women's football disparity, it's going to be there for still a long time. That's not going to go away from one day to another just because of big tournaments of investment. The FA have been doing really well, but there's still a lot to work on. And if ANFP don't get their head around investing in women's football now, we're just going to keep being behind everybody else. Because if we don't start now, if we don't pick up the momentum now, as we mentioned with the youth, if you don't start investing in domestic women's football, you're not going to have anybody on the national team once this round of players retire, which is pretty soon. Cristiane Ler is also, I think she's 31. She's not going to be here forever. And if you're not investing in the next round, it's, like I said, it's a vicious circle, it's ANFP always need to find a reason to invest because they're getting something back. And I don't think you can have that mentality in women's football. And you see it's not just Chile, it is CONMEBOL in general. Their treatment of women's football hasn't been the greatest, and it still isn't the greatest. Today, Argentina and Colombia released their new jerseys, and they involved their women's team in it. And it looked nice, you know, on paper. It was really nice. It was like, you know, same passion, same shirt, same jersey. But when you look at the actual treatment of the men's and the women's teams, it's so bad. And it's these little things that just, they think they're doing enough, and it's not true. So I think ANFP really need to step up and invest. I think invest is the key word.
And I mean, for me, you hit the nail on the head. It's investing in it because you think it's something to invest in and because it's something you think is worth investing in, not just because in the short term, like you said, there are glitzy tournaments coming up, the World Cup's coming up, for example, or the Copa America. This has to be a long-term plan. And even if, you know, they don't feel like that yet, we at least have, you know, in Chile next year, the Libertadores, which was supposed to be held in Chile this year. But again, like you mentioned, CONMEBOL, you know, doing CONMEBOL things and deciding to change country at the last minute. Obviously uproar, very little explanation as to why. I mean, do you think at least, I mean, what do you think of us hosting that tournament in Chile? Do you think it's at least something that, you know, will kind of give them that kick and that drive, at least for another year, to continue making this a project basically for the ANFP?
I think definitely. I think unfortunately without this tournament, they wouldn't have the incentive to continue to grow it. And with the tournament being, for example, now we have, you know, Chile qualifiers, which we'll touch on later. We have this anticipation to build up to, and then we have the summer, and then probably you're going to start anticipating, you're going to start building up the marketing, the advertisements to Copa Libertadores a few months from that. And I think unfortunately without these tournaments incentive for ANFP to invest and pay attention to women's football, they wouldn't do it otherwise. So I think hosting the tournament is going to be nothing but a good thing for women's football in Chile. And hopefully they do broadcast it locally. You know, by then, fingers crossed, fans can go in person. I think we saw that with the World Cup qualifiers games in Chile. That was tremendous success. You know, there was a lot of advertising on TV. There was a lot of advertisements with Cristian Eller doing things like Alexis Sanchez does with his dogs, for example. You know, it's a kick in Chile, and I think these tournaments are only good for women's football.
Well, you're such a pro, you segued into the next section for me. So we're now going to talk about, like you said, the upcoming Olympic qualifiers, which Chile will play Cameroon over 2 legs on the 10th and the 13th of April, confirmed to be held in Turkey. Again, another huge moment potentially for women's football, like you said, to give them that incentive to progress to something, to progress onto something, and in this case, the Olympics. Obviously, there were several key members of the national team that participated in these recent Libertadores. Guerrero, Pinilla, Zamora from La U, Soto, Sugelen Galaz, Araya from Morning. Do you think, I mean, first of all, before we go into any sort of predictions and you know, nerve-wracking hopes of qualifying for the Olympics, how much of a benefit is it, do you think, having these players play at such a high level before coming into the national team setup?
I think it's a big, I think it was good for them to taste a bit of defeat. You know, Santiago Morning with the Chile, they don't taste defeat often in the domestic league. And as of recently with the disparity of games, I don't think they've played for quite a while now. So I think ahead of this, especially because the national team hasn't been able to get any friendlies either since November, since they last played Zambia. And it's only been just like microcycles with local players. And I think this game time that they got to have in Copa Libertadores was big because they're going up against opposition that is better than them. And I think that's only a positive thing to have right before an Olympic qualifier. They're going to be upset, they're going to be emotional, and they're going to be motivated. Hopefully they use that emotion and disappointment to turn that around and go for everything against Cameroon.
And we mentioned exactly that in one of the previous episodes. It has been so long since this national team played, like you said, the end of last year, November now. And to have gone for such a long period of time, and like you said, only being able to work with domestic based players in those microcycles, it's so difficult, isn't it, having to turn up to a two-legged tie as big as this for a qualification into the Olympics, and you haven't even seen your teammates for almost, the best part of half a year now. The manager Letelier said, at the start of yesterday morning, it's obviously great now that we have dates in place. It will allow them to work towards that. Going into that game, obviously, given what we've spoken about, the lack of preparation that they have now a prolonged period of time together to work towards those games. What do you see happening in those games? I won't ask you exactly for a score prediction, but how do you envisage those games panning out?
I don't want to think about it, if I'm honest. I'm nervous. I think after the year that we've had, anything is going to be very unpredictable, which is what I'm nervous about. I am worried, though, because we did have a poor performance against Zambia, and the style of play is very similar. When you look at it, and if anything, Cameroon is slightly better with the players that they have. Cameroon has been at the forefront of women's football for quite a bit now. They performed well at the World Cup, maybe not the last one. But before that, they've been involved with the top of women's football for a while now, and I don't think that could be ignored when you compare it to a team like Chile, who just debuted in the World Cup last year, 2 years ago now. But I'm nervous. I do think that this Copa Libertadores run of games is going to be only good for the players, but I'm just worried that it's not enough. I'm scared. I am happy that we're going to play the second leg at home, which makes it a bit easier. I actually don't know where it's being played, if I'm being completely honest.
Turkey.
Okay, yeah, that's what I figured. So maybe no home advantage then. But I think over 2 legs, we might be able to do it. If it all depends. I think it's going to be about reaction. I think if Cameroon score, we're going to have to focus on that. I think if we score first, I think it's going to be a lot easier for us to manage the game, which will be interesting. But, I am worried about the defense, because our defense hasn't been the greatest as of recently. If you saw Santiago Morning, a few of our defenders are on that team, and the 9-0 loss was all defensive mistakes. Every single goal was a defensive mistake. Against Zambia too, our defense wasn't as sound. A few of the goals that Zambia scored, they were defensive. I wouldn't say errors. It was just flat out poor defending. So I am a bit worried on the defensive side if perhaps we can get caught quite easily.
Well, Chilean fans can maybe not rest assured completely, but we at least have the best goalkeeper in the world behind that dodgy defence, which should hopefully spare some blushes from any potential errors. You mentioned obviously that end of the pitch being something that could be of concern over the 2 legs. I mean, I think I'd agree with you that if I go with my head over my heart, I probably would consider us underdogs. It would be a tight. I think it would be tight. I'd be surprised if either side ran away with it completely, but I'd have Chile as underdogs in this instance. Certainly not huge underdogs. Certainly capable of qualifying. At the other end of the pitch, obviously you've already spoken about Dani Zamora, who's earned a well-deserved move. Who else in that tie do you see being key to these qualifiers?
I think, as I mentioned before, Pancha Mardones has been the best player that I've ever played with, and it's not because she's a high goal scorer. It's not because she makes X amount of assists a year. It's not about numbers, but the player that she is so intelligent, and if you let her dictate the tempo, if you let her be a composer in the midfield, I think will give you an extreme advantage, especially when against Cameroon, who it's going to be a high-paced, fast attack. If you have a player like Pancha that can slow down the tempo and use it in your favor, I think that's going to be key. But I don't know if Chile are capable of doing that, of controlling the tempo and keeping the ball and just exploiting the spaces and smartly. We saw that in Universidad de Chile. Fernanda Pinilla is arguably one of our best players at the moment also. She is in top form. But as we saw with Universidad de Chile, they couldn't settle nicely. And whenever they got the opportunity to counterattack, whenever they got a really good opportunity on goal, they became desperate and they ruined their chances. So I think, Karen Araya also, you can never go wrong with her. Cote Rojas is playing well in Australia as well. And I think it's how the team is going to show up on the day. As bad as that sounds, it's about how well they're going to manage, because if they start getting desperate, our defense is going to crumble, and then our attack is going to crumble, and we're not going to be able to capitalize. And I think capitalization also is going to be key, because Cameroon on a counterattack, they're gonna put it at the end of the net. As good as Christian Eller is, it's well capable of 1v1 against the best keeper in the world. Your odds are still pretty good. So I think it's about relying on Fernanda Pinilla, on Karen Araya, and on all these Daniela Zamora, on being capitalizing on all their chances and getting a lead that we desperately need to keep.
And I think, fortunately, we can take a lot of confidence from the fact that the majority of this group will be the same group that played together at the World Cup in France. And obviously the country's first ever World Cup, and, a moment of huge tension and pressure and nerves, I imagine. But they all handled themselves really well and were, the width of a crossbar away from qualifying for the knockout stages. So they've handled the pressure before, I'm sure, with the likes of, Captain Endler at the back, who bags of experience now, playing at the highest level for years. They can do so again. Alex, that's everything for today. Thank you so much for joining us again. Hopefully we'll have you back on the show soon.
Hopefully with good news after the games.
For sure. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
And we're back. Right. Getting straight into it, the Chilean football season got underway on Sunday. The first match of the season, as always, was the Super Cup. This time between Universidad Católica, last year's league champions, against Colo-Colo, who, as we all know by now, avoided relegation on the last day of the season in a relegation playoff. Things looked to be going well for Colo-Colo. 2-0 up, looked to have turned a corner following the end of last season. But in a remarkable 11 minutes, capitulated to concede 3 goals, concede the lead, and eventually lose 4-2. Thomas, it was a thrilling game to start the season. Had something of a feel of a pre-season friendly mixed with a cup final, as these things always do, as players start to find their fitness, start to find their form, teams gel with new players and teammates. What did you see from the game? What can you take from this game going into the season, which starts at the weekend?
Well, it's exactly that, right? The season starts this weekend on Saturday with Melipilla and Curicó Unido opening things up. The Players Association stopped their strike. They came to terms with ANFP, so that's really positive to see. And we always knew that this Supercopa was going to happen. Obviously, there was doubts in some people's minds, myself included. But it's good to see. And it kind of did feel like a friendly, just because it was played in neutral venue, of course, Estadio Nacional. It's interesting, Gustavo Poyet winning the battle of the Gustavos against Gustavo Quinteros, Católica's 4th consecutive title. So it marks this dynasty, which who knows how many more titles they're going to be able to hold up. Pretty much an intact team from the one previously to that. You mentioned there, pretty good start for Colo-Colo. They went up 2-0. It was good to see Gabriel Costa, Uruguayan nationalized Peruvian. This is a slightly improved Colo-Colo team. I was telling you, off air about the expectations for this Colo-Colo side. For me, I don't think they're going to be in relegation zone this 2020-2021 year. Obviously, a lot can change until then. But to me, because it's a new year, because Quinteros has his ways, he signed a couple players, and they got a couple guys back from the injury list. Colo-Colo started well, but obviously they got killed, and it definitely was, I think, it impacted the players' morale when Falcón got a red card. I think that particular event really impacted the way the players performed on the pitch. Going down one man is never easy, especially since Colo-Colo are thin at the back in terms of center backs. The sporting director is not happy at all. He gave an interview with Radio Cooperativa. But it's interesting because the youngster Morales, he looked good out there. And I think what can you expect from Universidad Católica side who have been absolutely dominating Chilean football for the past couple of years?
I mean, and you mentioned Falcon's red card. I mean, what a moment of complete stupidity. I mean, like you said, they're already light as it is in defence. And on top of that, he came in at the midway point, about roughly the midway point of last season, and was a huge player for them. And you know, that addition essentially, you know, could have saved them from relegation. He really was that good. He really was that much of a standout player. And it must be said, the incident in which he got sent off, not only did he swing one punch, as he was being escorted off the pitch, went back for seconds. So he obviously put out an apology today, you know, tail between the legs, very apologetic. But, you know, given the circumstances, given, you know, he went back for seconds for another round, you know, you would expect a longer ban than perhaps the 3-match ban that is standard. How much will that impact them? I mean, it's hard to say, isn't it, what Colo-Colo's expectations are this season. I mean, I don't think fans are going to expect a title challenge. I think any sort of progression from, you know, essentially relegation candidates to mid-table would be good. But, I mean, how much is that going to affect them in the early stages of the season when, you know, having all of your best players and picking up points so soon is so important?
Well, it is important, right? It is important to get the season started in the right foot. And Colo-Colo know that, you know, everyone knows how quickly things can go wrong, especially if, you know, 4 or 5 games have happened and you only have 2 points. It was nice to see Martin Rodriguez, his debut with Colo-Colo after a lengthy spell in Liga MX with some big clubs, including Pumas. But it's interesting because Colo-Colo in this game relied heavily on Chileans. The only 2 foreigners that they had was Falcon, who we just spoke about, got red carded in the 90th minute, and Pablo Solari, the savior that really saved them from relegation, as opposed to a Católica side that are heavy loaded in Argentinians. I mean, it's 5 foreigners against 2 or 3. For me personally, I would say Colo-Colo are still very much thin. I mean, the only 2 signings that they really, the big signings, I guess, Gaete, who actually came off the bench yesterday, who signed from Cobresal, and Mico Albornoz, who got injured. Surprise, surprise, you know. He hadn't played a competitive match in 6 months, from playing in the second division of Germany. Besides those 2 players, I mean, Martin Rodriguez what came off the bench, and besides that, the other players that you had were released by the club, you know, the legends and the club icons. And Colo-Colo are really thin right now, very, very thin, and they don't really have a lot of, I guess you could say, extra, the X factor. Some people can say whatever you want, but that's the reality right now. Marcos Volado played against his former club. He had a decent game against them, but Colo-Colo right now just need more weapons. I mean, if you're gonna go to war, this is just a battle. If you're going to go to war, you're going to need as many guns as possible.
And we should add that the whole scuffle at the end, if you want to call it that, the handbags, was started by Saavedra's headbutt, Católica's midfielder. So you'd expect him to pick up something of a ban to start the season as well. Just to use this game to look ahead, you mentioned the Battle of the Gustavos earlier. Obviously, Poyet coming out on top. He made a triple substitution just after Colo-Colo went 2-0 up. That triple substitution changed the game. Within the space of 11 minutes, they were 3-2 up. How difficult of a job do you think he has? I mean, from the outside looking in, it seems like taking the Católica job might be one of the most cushy jobs in football at the moment. The two historical main rivals, Laú and Colo-Colo, you know, are very much in a rebuilding phase. I think people, I mean, if either of those go close to challenging for the title, I think a lot of people would be surprised. Do you see, you know, even on last week's episode, I said it seemed like a left field choice going for Poyet compared to their previous decisions. Do you see, given Católica's dominance over the last 3 years and how settled their squad is, how well run they are as an institution, I mean, do you see this as their title to lose? Do you see it as, is it going to be a walk in the park, or, who will their challengers be?
It is absolutely Católica's title to lose.
Mm-hmm.
As I said before, they have made absolutely no changes. The squad is intact. I've said in previous episodes before, they're so deep that they can pretty much put 2 starting 11s and compete in Primera Division. And that's what they do, right? Just because they have so many good youngsters coming from the academy. Our panelists, Dan Campos, have said before, Católica are the best football school in the country, and that's true. Gustavo Poyet, he has less than a week, just a little bit more than a week, in the head coaching role, and he's already winning titles. I mean, that's crazy. But like you say, when you already have the players and you already have the infrastructure, then what else do you really need to move? It's funny, they interviewed Quinteros, and it was more interesting then because Quinteros knows more about what it's like to coach in Chile and what it's like to coach in Católica than Gustavo Poyet. Poyet had only been to Chile just 2 or 3 times before signing with Católica as the manager. So he's certainly so new in this role, but it turns out that he's already doing big things, and it's not really affecting the time frame of things. Now, the expectations right now, the only club that I could really see challenging Universidad Católica this year, I would say Unión La Calera again, just because they looked so good last year. Obviously, they lost Tomás Rodríguez to Universidad de Chile, but they added Jorge Valdivia. For me, a lot of people might say, Jorge Valdivia is already washed up. He's 36, 37 years old. His nickname is El Mago for a reason. I can tell you how many games I watched of Chile as a 14, 15, 16-year-old growing up. Valdivia would come on for 30 minutes, 20 minutes. I don't know how long it would be. And he would just change up the tempo of the game. That's incredible. Now, if you can get him healthy, Unión La Calera may have a push in them. Universidad de Chile, they finished as Chile 3, but they still lack a player or two. And I'm not even sure the players can even sign. I'm not even sure the clubs can even sign players anymore. So they got a couple of signings, but they could be challenging for a second spot perhaps.
And it was interesting you mentioned Católica's depth, their strength in depth. Obviously saying they could quite comfortably field 2 strong 11s. And that's going to be especially important if they're going to, try and overcome this hoodoo of qualifying from the Libertadores group stages, which they've failed to do in recent years. We've spoken on previous shows about how far clear they are of the rest of the competition in Chile, and won the title 3 years in a row now. We really need to find out what their level is and what they're made of against the rest of the continent's best sides. As we saw last year, Coquimbo, with their thin squad at the bottom of the table, they really, really suffered domestically because of their long run in the Sudamericana. What do you see Católica's potential being both in the Libertadores and simultaneously in the league? Do you see it as being a case of, for once, if they have to, prioritize the Libertadores and play the strongest team there, and then perhaps play the weaker teams, with the so-called weaker team, domestically?
Yeah, if I were Gustavo Poyet, I would prioritize the Copa Libertadores and potentially Copa Sudamericana if they get knocked out and qualify into the Sudamericana, because they've already done so well in the Primera Division that they don't really have to prove out anything else. Everyone knows that Católica is the best club in Chile. They could finish in the top 2, top 3, and they'll still make it to the group stage. But the truth is, Católica, you mentioned before, Coquimbo, with such a thin squad, they made it all the way to the Copa Sudamericana semifinals. I would wonder what would happen if Católica were to do the same, were to prioritize the Copa Libertadores as opposed to the Primera Division. What could the potential of the team be? How far could they make it down the road? But again, it didn't seem like they took as importance to the Copa Libertadores as they did to the Primera Division. And knowing the sporting director, Burhu Wasic, I just don't know if he's going to do that.
And it's obviously interesting you mentioned that. You would think the fans, obviously domestically, it's always nice to get one over on your rivals. You know, they'd like to try and close the gap for number of titles to Colo-Colo. But you have to say, with the squad that they have now, with how settled the team is, I mean, you surely going for it on the continent would have to take priority this season. But looking ahead to the domestic season, obviously this is only possible. The season is only starting on Sunday because the Chilean Federation, ANFP, came to an agreement with the Players Association, SIFUP, to end the strike. The players had been unhappy, in particular in the third division, that the third division had only been awarded what they called half a promotion place into the second division. So the champion wasn't guaranteed a route into the second division. Instead, they would have had to play a playoff to get promoted against a team at the bottom of Primera B. How important is it? I mean, you mentioned on the last show that we'd already had 2 stoppages in the season in recent years. One, obviously, because of the coronavirus pandemic, and 2, because of the social movement in Chile that caused leagues to be stopped, and actually was the root of this relegation promotion issue. How important is it, you know, both for us domestically as a league, but then also the trickle-down effect that could have into the national team for the season to be going ahead?
Oh, it's very important, especially if how in the future conversations end with FIFA talking to CONMEBOL about the South American qualifiers. We know it's already public knowledge that the March windows were cancelled. But if those 2 games against Ecuador and Paraguay are moved now to June or somehow fit through in the fall, I just could not see a national team window being played with local players. You need the players from Europe and North America. But it is a big effect, doesn't it? Because it's not just you're not just playing with the entertainment, so to speak. You're playing with people's livelihoods at this point. And last time when there was this 200+ day stoppage, the players came back and they were rusty. They were rusty for a long time, and that affected a lot of things. A lot of people were let go, and overall, you need the league to be active. We just saw now that the Brazilian league is suspended due to just how bad the situation is over in Brazil, with Bolsonaro not really restricting anything COVID-19 wise. Yeah. So a lot of things happening in the Primera Division. As you mentioned, there begins with Melipilla and Curicó Unido. Other games include Everton O'Higgins, Colo-Colo playing against La Calera at home, Unión Española versus Santiago Wanderers, Palestino versus Deportes Antofagasta, Huachipato Cobresal, Nublense Universidad Católica, and Alex Italiano versus your favorite, Matias, Deportes La Serena, with Universidad de Chile taking out the bye since they're going through their own COVID-19 struggle outbreak. What game for you stands out, and which is the most exciting?
I mean, aside from obviously La Serena's easy 3 points against Audax Italiano, obviously for me it has to be Colo-Colo against Unión La Calera. Colo-Colo, as we know, coming off last season's struggles. La Calera, the complete opposite, were flying and pushed Católica close for the league at the end of last season. I think the first game of the season, it will be a good measure for us to see where these 2 teams are. Obviously, Colo-Colo made a lot of additions. We saw, for periods on Sunday in the Super Cup, they looked a lot better than they had done last season. But then it kind of looked like all of those old issues came back to haunt them for a while. Conversely, La Calera, after their brilliant season, they've seen 2 or 3 of their key players from last year leave, understandably, to go to bigger clubs in Chile. And, it's always interesting when that happens to a smaller club that's had success. How do they recover from that essentially? How good is their how good is their continuing scouting process and player development process so that they can get players in and fill the void of those players that have left. So I'm looking forward to seeing that. I'm looking forward to seeing where those two teams are. How about you?
Well, since you already mentioned one of the two games that I was looking forward to in Colo-Colo La Calera, I'm going to go with a different game. I'm going to go with Unión Española versus Santiago Wanderers. Unión Española almost beat out Unión La Calera in the second place last season. They signed Bolivian international Alejandro Chumacero. They didn't look too bad against Independiente del Valle. Obviously, it was tough for them, allowing that many goals in the second and final leg. I guess now that's a time where you really realize that the Ecuadorian League is just a step or two over the Chilean League. I want to see how they rebound after obviously getting knocked out in the international competition. One that maybe may go under the radar is Palestino and Antofagasta. These are two teams that finished near the top of the table, specifically 5th and 6th place. And they almost qualified into the Copa Libertadores second stage, and they qualified for Sudamericana. So one of these two teams could definitely be challenging top 4, top 5, if they're consistent again.
And just before we move on to the show's final section on the national team call-ups, just a cursory mention it happened a week ago almost now, but to the Chilean teams in the Libertadores. Unión Española, in Carlos Palacios' last game as a player, suffered a heavy 6-2 defeat away to Independiente del Valle to lose 6-3 on aggregate. And Universidad de Chile lost 2-0 to San Lorenzo. Obviously, La U going through a lot of COVID issues at the moment, had 14 members of their setup out with COVID for that game, which is understandably why they're sitting out that first round of fixtures. So moving on to the final section, the national team. A few surprise calls up. Obviously, this is Martin Lasarte's debut game as Chile head coach. A belated happy birthday to him. It was his birthday this weekend. Chile take on Bolivia in a friendly on March 26th at the rather late time of 10 p.m. Obviously, this was the time that the South American qualifiers were meant to take place. You know, Chile had two very, very important games to play given their slow start to qualifiers. Instead, Lasarte has called up a squad predominantly made up of domestic players that he's been working with in his microcycle over the last few weeks. Claudio Bravo, a surprise call-up from Spain, from Real Betis. Obviously, the situations, the COVID situations in Europe in different countries mean that some players, like those playing in England, for example, and those playing in Italy haven't been called up. But Bravo is a surprise inclusion and, you know, a welcome addition to this. It's nice to see his name back on there after, a prolonged period being in and out with injury. And just to add, Gabriel Castellón of Huachipato and Brian Cortés of Colo-Colo are in there, you'd presume as backup. Are you surprised to see Bravo back?
I am surprised to see him just because how strict the European clubs are when it comes to lending out their players, specifically up for a friendly. Let's not forget, for people listening, this is not an official match. This is a friendly. But I suppose Real Betis wanted him to see the playing field. And this is a good chance for Bravo to get a full 90 minutes to do just that because Bravo has been injured. He's missed out many games, a couple of months actually, in La Liga with Real Betis. So if he can come out into the national team, play this game, get a clean sheet, get fully fit, and then he can be a real option when he comes back to Manuel Pellegrini into his side. To be a reliable option for El Ingeniero.
And you never know. Obviously, Pellegrini's Chilean connection. I'm sure he didn't want to upset the ANFP and keep Bravo from them. Just to go through defense: Sebastián Vegas, Enzo Rocco, Daniel González, Karim Medel called up from Bologna, but still as of yet not confirmed as whether or not they'll let him leave. Valver Huerta, Eric Wimberg, Juan Salida, and the surprise inclusion of the now second division with Coquimbo Unido, Jean Beausejour. It's a mixture of experience and youth at the back. Obviously, would be nice for Medel to come back and play. I mean, you spoke to me off air about, your surprise at Jean Beausejour being called up, despite now being in the second division, obviously having retired once from the national team. I mean, why is it, do you think, he is called up still? And, why, for example, would someone like Eugenio Mena still not be in the squad when Lasarte specifically said that the door was open for every player when he first joined?
Yeah, so just one thing to add on the goalkeeper situation. I'm surprised to not see a younger third string goalkeeper option like Zacarias Lopez instead of Gabriel Castellón in there. And about the defenders, it's great to see Gary Medel back with the national team. He missed last window in November. Definitely missed him there. But yeah, Jean Beausejour. This is a call-up that I'm scratching my head at. Certainly, I don't know about you, Matias, but I certainly am. Jean Beausejour is 36, excuse me. He's not getting any younger. And he's going to be playing in the Segunda Division, Primera B, this year with Coquimbo Unido. I just don't know if you want to count on a second division player, any level, unless it's England, Italy, or Spain. I don't know many second divisions in the world that are actually quality enough that you can have a national team player playing consistently and then calling him up. It's nice to see Enzo Rocco back in the squad. We knew that with Rueda, he was sort of in the outside looking in. And not surprisingly, because just how many good defenders are coming up right now, with obviously Maripan, which we'll talk about a little later, Pablo Diaz, Mario Isla, who just got best right back in the Brasileirão, his brother Nicolas Diaz, Serralta, Benjamin Kusevich. So many good defenders are coming up. But, as you said before, this is a call-up based mainly on Chilean players and with some sprinkled in from South America and a couple from Europe. But yeah, overall, I think Sebastián Vegas, he's still 24 years old. He's playing at a very, very good Monterrey side. With Liga MX having such good teams, I know you disagree, but the recent performance from Monterrey's rival Tigres at the FIFA Club World Cup shows how good there it is. And Vegas is 24, so maybe if he does well, I know Mexican clubs want big amounts for any star players. There's been lots of not just Mexican players, but national team players from Colombia, Ecuador, Paraguay, Argentina too. National team players that have done well in Mexico have been wanted by European clubs. But the Mexican clubs ask for way too much money, like 8 or 9 mil release clause. So obviously, European clubs decide to go with a younger, more cheap version in Brazil or Argentina, where they can pay for 4 or 5 mil. But happy to see Sebastián Vegas for sure, and Valver Huerta. He's been playing quite well at Universidad Católica.
I'm just gonna back Jean Beausejour up a bit and stand in his corner. I mean, left back is a position that we infamously are very light on at the moment. I mean, like I mentioned before, Eugenio Mena, probably the only other choice we have there that you would feasibly say is up to it at international standard for the goals that Chile have in mind. And Jean Beausejour, in my eyes, has never let the national team down, has been a consummate professional the whole time. That veteran leadership, in the changing room can't be overstated. But on top of that, he's maintained for the national team, as a lot of this golden generation have, despite playing at a lower level at their clubs, they've always stepped up for the national team, which has been a key feature for the success of this golden generation. So, I mean, it's funny, isn't it? I mean, unless we uncover the next big thing at left back, I mean, feasibly Jean Beausejour could still be playing at the upcoming Qatar World Cup. Going into the midfield.
No way.
No, you had to cut me off there before we moved on.
Yeah, no way. Bocajuru is going to be 37. Be playing second division. No way.
Okay. Well, let's keep our fingers crossed. We find a new left back then. Moving on to the midfielders, you spoke to me about one in particular that you were looking forward to. We'll go through them now. Galdanes from Vélez Sarsfield, César Pinares, Ignacio Savera, who, as we mentioned earlier, kick-started that scuffle with a headbutt at the weekend. Thomas Alarcón, Pablo Parra, and Angelo Arauz. Thomas Alarcón, you mentioned to me off-air. Tell me a bit about him and why you're so excited to hopefully see him get more game time for the national team, because he hasn't got too much when he's been called up recently.
So this is a home game for Alarcón. This is a game that's being played in Rancagua. He's an O'Higgins player, so he doesn't have to move. Very convenient for him. And in the games that I've seen him play in the U20 2 years ago, he looked good. And he's one of very, very, very few midfielders in his position and in his age. He's only 22. Unfortunately, not many young midfielders are in the Primera Division playing consistently, which is unfortunate because most of the starting midfielders in his position are either Argentinian, Uruguayan, or if they're Chilean, they're 29, 30, 31, 32 years old, right? So Alarcón is a gem, one that I rate very highly. And I don't know, Luis Jimenez for me, 36 years old. I don't see him sticking around for too long. I think this is a call-up for Lasarte as a shoo-in, as a fill-in. I don't think he'll be part of the process. And if he is part of the process, considering we have a lot of younger midfielders, I'd be surprised. One player that I am happy about besides Alarcón is Pablo Galdanes, who he's playing in Vélez Sarsfield. His younger brother actually is getting interest from Mexico. But Galdanes, he's playing for a Vélez side that made it quite far in the Copa Sudamericana. And not only that, to me at least, I know some people say that because of the economic restraints that Argentina has, that you can't take out a certain amount of money, et cetera, because of that, it weakens the Argentine league. To me, the Argentine league is top 15 in the world. If not top 15, then top 10. And Vélez Sarsfield is the 6th best club in Argentina in terms of titles. So to me, Galdanes is a great player. He's still young, 24 years old, and one that I was surprised that he wasn't part of in the previous segment. And good to see Angelo Arauz, who's at Corinthians, also a 24-year-old, who I hope to see more of.
And you mentioned Luis Jimenez, obviously did play further forward for Palestino last season and got plenty of goals, was, despite his age, looked somewhat reinvented there. And, in my eyes was kind of the, like we said earlier, Lasarte said the door was open to all players, and then Jimenez is kind of the embodiment of that. Nobody's too old to be in here. If you're playing well, then you deserve a shot. And I mean, given Chile's goal scoring issues at the moment that we've had throughout this entire qualification process, with Eduardo Vargas looking way, way, way below his old self, could Luis Jimenez, in the short term, like you said, I do agree with you. I think this is a short-term move, be the one to get those goals. Just to go through the rest of the forwards, Clemente Montes of Católica, Brian Carrasco of Palestino, Fabian Orellana, another call-up from Spain, from Valladolid, scored again at the weekend. A strange player for the national team, seems to have performed well at club level in Spain for a lot of his career, but never quite managed to translate that onto the national team stage. João Meneses, Angelo Enriquez, and last but by no means least, the man of the moment really in Chile and now Brazil, Carlos Palacios, who funnily had his move to Inter de Porto Alegre announced by the national team before Inter managed to. He's obviously at the opposite end of his career to Luis Jimenez, just 20 years old, has been in, brilliant form for Española for at least the last year now. Fully deserving of this move. Is this, like we said earlier, Jimenez is very much part of the old guard and a surprise call-up. Do you see Palacios, he's a player I'm extremely excited about. Do you see him as potentially the future of this Chilean front line?
I mean, I wouldn't go as far as saying that he's going to be the immediate future, because as we all know, Matias, there is such a thing as club and international career. It's almost like a different sport. I mean, that's what a lot of players have said in multiple interviews and how they would describe it. Pulling on the national team jersey comes with a lot of expectation, a lot of pressure, and a lot of desire. You can do great things at club, but if you don't come into the national team and don't deliver, heck, some players haven't received call-ups in 7-8 years, or even longer, for longer periods of time, because they just have not delivered with the national team, or they haven't been to the liking of that certain manager. We do have other forwards at our disposal, and Carlos Palacios is one of them. If I were Lasarte myself, I would try and squeeze as much left as possible of Alexis Sanchez and Eduardo Vargas, and the third, fourth, fifth position every window. Try out new guys, guys playing in MLS, guys playing in Mexico, guys playing in Turkey, different divisions in Europe, Brazil, Argentina. That's what I would do personally, and there's a list of 10, 12 players that are playing in those similar leagues, similar levels that Chile could try on. But yeah, not just Carlos Palacios, who unfortunately, just as he signs for Inter de Porto Alegre, the Brasileirão has been suspended. It was suspended a couple days before his signing, actually. So who knows when he will play next in Brazil. But interesting to see Angelo Enriquez, because it feels like this guy has been around forever. I remember when he signed with Manchester United at the age of 18 or 19. This was back in 2012. 2013. You know, he was the top goal scorer of the Chilean league at age 19. So he got there. He had multiple loans. Did quite well with in Spain with Real Zaragoza, and then ended up in Zagreb. Moved over to Atlas in Mexico, and he's only 26 years old right now. He's only 26 years old. Yeah. I mean, he's only 26, and it feels like he's been around forever. But Fabián Orellana, I guess because Lasarte is a new coach, and he hasn't coached Orellana before. I guess that's why he's willing to give him a chance. He's done well with Valladolid, the club owner being Ronaldo Nazario. But yeah, I mean, he hasn't really delivered for the national team. We'll see what he does. And Jimenez, let's not forget he Liga MX, with León. So we'll see what he does. But yeah, I mean, it's interesting because the microcycle that Lasarte had recently, it's almost like a completely different side. If you look at the names that Lasarte called up for his microcycle, all of them have zero caps, and are all almost under 23, 24 years old. So it's almost like he wanted to just have a look for some sort of U23 side, but this is definitely the side that he has gone to go with. He has chosen to go with.
And funny you mentioned Enriquez, actually. I mean, just doing a bit of research for this show, I put his name into Google, and like you, was so surprised to see that he was still only 26. And it has to be said, well deserving of this call-up. Under previous León manager Hernán Caputo, he had 1 goal in his previous 20 games. And since Dudamel took over, he's now got 5 goals in his last 10 games, so a goal every other game, which is, exactly the return that you want from your striker, really. Rebirth there. And, remains to be seen whether that confidence can translate onto the national team and he can become something resembling the player we've always thought. But, I mean, like you said, the weight of the national team shirt really does weigh some players down. And this golden generation has been defined by those players. I mean, the prime examples would be Gonzalo Jara and Gary Medel. Never been world beaters at club level. But then when they put on the red shirt, when they come and play for the national team, you watch them and you ask, how are these guys not playing for Real Madrid, Barcelona? And it's just something about it. Some players step up, and unfortunately Orellana hasn't quite managed to translate that club form into the national team. So just to wrap up, that game is coming up at the end of the week, March 26th, as we said, 10 p.m. Just before we go, Thomas, you said it's a young squad. It has the feel of an experimental squad. Hopefully he can uncover, like you said, one or two young players that he likes. That will be key going forward in these World Cup qualifiers whenever they do resume. But just before we go, just on the game, a score prediction from you. And, what are you looking for from the game? Does it matter too much if we win or lose, as long as we see something positive and we see something that we can take forward under Lasarte?
Some people might disagree with what I'm about to say, but that's okay. I don't think the result matters as much as people think it does. It's Lasarte's debut. I agree. It's Lasarte. It's his first game under La Roja. But at the end of the day, it's a meaningless friendly. This is a combination of a B/C side for Chile. Yes, you have Bravo. Yes, you have Medel. Yes, you have Vegas, Rocco, Orellana, possibly Pinares. But still, the vast majority of the team, for me at least, wouldn't crack the top roster, the top 20 pool, 20 to 23 player pool. So I just hope that Lasarte can get the best out of Carlos Palacios, can get the best out of Angelo Enriquez, Alarcón, maybe Vegas. It would be nice. It would be nice to see also what Enriquez can do. Jimenez, Galdanes, Pinares, who's doing quite well in Gremio. So this is the kind of thing that I want to see from Lasarte. And I just remembered, you mentioned Juan Salida earlier. He's out of the squad now because he got injured. Otherwise, he would have been in the squad. He's a player that does deliver for the national team. And that's exactly the kind of player that we do need. Yes, you can play in the National League. That's no problem, as the case is for many of these players. But you have to be in form. That's most important. You have to be in form, and you have to deliver for the national team. Because when Juan Salida, and let's not forget, I think this is the perfect example, Matias. When Juan Salida was playing at Católica and Colo-Colo, he would go up against the midfielders of Colombia, of Argentina, of Brazil, in the Copa America, 2015, 2016, and Uruguay. And he would deliver. He would go toe-to-toe with these guys, and he would be playing at Católica. These guys would be playing in Europe, Juventus, Spain, England. And that's the thing, right? I mean, at the end of the day, people think club football matters. To me, I think of club football as a guideline. There's many guys playing at good levels who just never get to that top level, but does not mean that they can't go toe to toe.
Brilliant. On that note, we'll end the episode there. Thanks to everyone for listening. Thomas, thank you for joining me today. I think you can have hosting responsibilities back next week. It's definitely a lot harder than you make it look. We are in partnership with Chile Today News. Thank you everybody for listening, and we will speak to you next time.